The first thing the settlers heard wasn't the wind or the call of an animal or even the groan of shifting trees. It was the rhythm, a low, distant thump that carried through the Blue Ridge valleys like a heartbeat pressed against the earth. No one could place the direction, and no matter how still the night became, the sound always seemed to be coming from somewhere deeper, beyond the next ridge, beyond the next shadowed hollow. And the strangest part, everyone who heard it swore it kept perfect time, as if played by a practiced hand. By the end of that first year in the late 1700s, nearly every family in the small frontier settlement at the base of Craggy Pinnacle had heard the same phantom drumming. Hunters who camped along the Elk Mountain Trail said the rhythm changed when they moved, as if the unseen drummer shifted tempo to mirror their steps. Women gathering water from the riverbank spoke of hearing two beats close together, then one far off, like a signal. And the elders, those who had crossed weeks of dangerous wilderness just to reach this new land, said they'd rather face another winter of scarcity than spend a single night hearing that sound alone. What none of them knew then was that the drumming had a history stretching far beyond their arrival. Cherokee communities, long established in these mountains, carried stories of a spirit drummer, an unseen guardian said to walk the highest ridges and the oldest trails. They called him a keeper, a watcher, one whose music marked the boundaries between the living and the dead. To hear his drum, they said, was not a threat, it was a warning. The settlers, however, had no such context. All they had were long nights, thin cabins, and a wilderness so vast it swallowed torchlight whole. The first recorded account from a settler came from a man named Elias Turner, a farmer whose family pushed into the Blue Ridge region around 1784. Elias kept a simple journal, scraps of parchment filled with crooked handwriting describing weather, crops, and the condition of his livestock. Most entries were routine, dull, the expected rhythm of frontier life. But the entry from October 9th stood apart. His handwriting shook. The ink pooled where the quill lingered too long. He wrote, "A hollow sound carries from the North Ridge, not thunder, not man. A drum, but no drummer." Elias tried to dismiss it, yet that night after his children fell asleep and the cabin quieted, he heard it again, slow, steady, deliberate. 3 beats, a pause, then 3 more, echoing along the treetops as if played from a place higher than any man could stand. He stepped outside into the chill. The moon was thin, a slice of pale silver caught between drifting clouds. The forest lay dark and motionless. But the sound persisted, soft but pervasive, as if the woods themselves were remembering some older rhythm. His closest neighbor, Samuel Higgins, lived a mile down the narrow trail. Samuel later told others that he too heard it that night. And when he woke his wife, she said her late father used to talk about sounds like that when he traveled down through the mountains as a trapper. He said drums came before storms, she whispered, or before death. Elias didn't know what to make of that, but he wrote it down all the same, perhaps hoping that someday he would understand. Over the next weeks, the settlers' unease grew. Reports scattered across the valley. A hunting party claimed the drumming followed them for hours, no matter how far they trekked. A teenage boy swore he saw a faint glow on the ridge as the sound pulsed, though others dismissed it as imagination. And a woman named Ruth Fenton insisted the rhythm quickened when she passed a certain cedar tree on the trail, only to slow again once she was beyond it. What frightened them most wasn't the sound itself, but its consistency. Storms came and went, wildlife migrated, even settlers moved cabins or shifted farmlands. But the drumming? It stayed, night after night, season after season, always distant, always unreachable. The settlers eventually approached a Cherokee interpreter named Sali, who had been living near the French Broad River. They hoped he could explain what they heard. Sali listened quietly as Elias described the patterns, the timing, the persistence. Only when they finished did he speak. "That is not a warning for you," he said calmly. "It is a warning for the land." He explained that long before Europeans crossed into these mountains, Cherokee travelers knew of a spirit who kept watch over ancient trails used by their ancestors. His drum marked sacred boundaries, places where the living were not meant to linger. Some stories said he beat his drum to guide wandering souls. Others said he drummed to keep something contained. "What is he keeping in?" Samuel asked. Solly shook his head. "Not in, out." The settlers left uneasy and unconvinced, unsure whether this was folklore or a polite way of telling them they had trespassed where they should not have. But Solly's words stuck with Elias for years, resurfacing every time the drumming found him in the dark. By the start of the 1800s, missionaries entered the region with the aim of establishing schools and converting local Cherokee families. Some came from distant states and found themselves unsettled by the strangeness of the mountains, its sudden fog banks, its quiet hollows, its sharp winds that sometimes carried sounds from miles away. One missionary, Reverend Arlen Whitcomb, kept meticulous records. Letters, journals, even sketches of the landscape. In 1807, while staying near the Oconaluftee River, he documented what he called the mountain's phantom percussion. At first, he assumed it was distant thunder rolling across the ridgelines, but then the pattern repeated. Same spacing, same rhythm, over and over. He wrote that the sound didn't always carry the same tone. Sometimes it was hollow and deep, like a drum of animal hide stretched across a wooden frame. Other times, it was sharp, almost metallic. And once, just once, he believed he heard it in two places at once, behind him and far ahead, as if the mountains themselves were responding. His letters described a growing superstition among travelers. Those heading west claimed the drums sounded before storms. Others insisted it came before violent deaths, accidents, animal attacks, sudden sickness. Missionaries dismissed the claims as frontier anxiety, but the pattern became difficult to ignore. On August 2nd, 1813, Whitcomb wrote of a night when the drumming grew so loud the horses panicked and a tree split in the valley during a lightning strike. The storm rolled in within minutes, tearing branches from the slopes and flooding the narrow trails. Yet what stayed with him wasn't the destruction. It was that the drumming had begun almost half an hour before the first cloud appeared. Still, he tried to rationalize it. Sound carried strangely in the mountains. Echoes could bounce in unpredictable ways. Perhaps someone somewhere was playing an instrument in celebration or ritual. But then the deaths began. 3 hunters from the settlement at Laurel Creek never returned from an autumn expedition. When a search party eventually found them, their bodies lay arranged in a neat circle, rifles untouched, gear unlooted. No animal tracks nearby, no signs of struggle. And carved into the earth at the center of the circle was a pattern. 3 indentations, evenly spaced, as if struck by something round and heavy. Elias Turner, older now and more weary, recognized the spacing immediately. 3 beats. A pause. 3 beats. Some settlers insisted this was proof of violence, perhaps from another tribe, perhaps from rival hunters. But others felt something colder settling into their bones. If a human hand had carved those marks, why leave the bodies untouched? Why take nothing? Why choose a formation that matched the very rhythm haunting their nights? A council meeting was held in the settlement's largest cabin. Dozens crammed inside, breath white in the frigid air, candles flickering on faces drawn tight with fear. Debate raged for hours. Some wanted to abandon the valley entirely. Others argued that leaving meant surrendering their hard-earned land. Still others insisted the drumming was harmless. A coincidence, a trick of the terrain. And then the sound began. No one outside was moving. No one inside was speaking. Yet the drumming rose from somewhere beyond the northern ridge, soft but unmistakable. 3 beats, a long pause, then 4. That 4th beat, out of rhythm, out of place, made the room go silent. And in the flickering candlelight, several settlers claimed they saw the flames bend toward the door, as if drawn by a sudden draft. Except the air inside was utterly still. No wind, no movement, no explanation. The drumming stopped as abruptly as it began, but from that night on, the pattern changed. Gone was the steady, predictable rhythm. Now it varied, sometimes mimicking footsteps, sometimes matching breaths, as if the unseen drummer wasn't marking a boundary anymore, as if he was following someone. Whitcomb, still traveling the region, heard about the incident months later. He reached out to the settlement, hoping to document the event. But by the time he arrived, the community was half empty. Families had returned east, others had fled south. Only a handful remained, including Elias, who looked older than the years would suggest. Whitcomb stayed with him several nights, hoping to hear the drumming himself. And on the fourth night, just as the moon began to sink behind the ridge, it came. Subtle, almost gentle, yet neither man slept until dawn. Whitcomb wrote that the sound felt deliberate, like a message meant for them alone. Elias said it felt more like a warning that had come too late. Neither man knew then that what they heard was only the beginning. As the decades passed and the mountains changed, settlements rising, Cherokee families forced westward, new trails carved into ancient paths, the drumming persisted. Travelers in the mid-1800s wrote of hearing it along the Buncombe Turnpike. Soldiers during the Civil War claimed the sound echoed before ambushes. Even after the war, when the region quieted again, hikers and loggers still reported the same haunting rhythm. But the strangest accounts came not from settlers or soldiers, but from a reclusive mountain family known as the Caldwells, who lived deep in a hollow untouched by most travelers. They claimed the drumming wasn't a warning at all. They claimed it was a summons. And what they meant by that, what they believed was being summoned, is a story that has been whispered through generations, never written in any official record, never shared lightly. It is a story tied to old trails, to ancient boundaries, and to something the mountains have kept hidden longer than any settlement has existed. And it begins with a night when the drumming grew so loud it shook the leaves from the trees. A night when a traveler vanished without a trace, just yards from the Caldwell homestead. The Caldwells had lived in the hollow since the early 1800s, long before the roads were carved deep enough for wagons, long before the rail lines pushed into the mountains. Their cabin sat tucked between two steep ridges, where the light barely touched the ground in winter, and fog clung to the rocks like breath. Neighbors said the family kept to themselves, not unfriendly, just quiet. Mountain folk who understood the land the way a reader understood the worn pages of a familiar book. But they understood something else too. They knew the drumming better than anyone. Eliza Caldwell, the family matriarch, told her children never to whistle after dark, never to travel the ridge road alone at night, and never to follow the drum, no matter how close it sounded. She spoke of it with a sternness that made the children believe it was less a superstition and more a rule woven into the mountain itself. Her husband Silas, a hunter and trapper, claimed the drumming wasn't distant at all. Not truly. It only sounds far when it don't want to be found, he said. When it wants you to hear it, you'll hear it close. And on the night of the stranger's disappearance, it was very, very close. According to family accounts later shared in fragments with a traveling schoolteacher, the Caldwells had been preparing to sleep when the sound erupted. Not the soft, rolling rhythm settlers described, but a violent, pounding beat that shook dust from the rafters. The chickens outside panicked, wings slapping the coop walls. The family dog pressed flat to the floor, trembling so hard his claws scratched the wood. Silas grabbed his rifle, but Eliza stopped him with a whisper. "If you go out now," she said, "you won't come back." Before he could answer, a man's voice, rose from the darkness outside. "Hello? Is someone awake? Hello?" It was a traveler, likely one who had lost the trail in the dark. In any other circumstance, the Caldwells would have welcomed him. But Silas felt something off in the man's tone. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't confusion. It almost sounded calm. Too calm for someone stranded in the mountains at night during a stormless silence. Eliza's face drained of color. "He shouldn't be near the boundary," she whispered. "Not tonight." The drumming grew louder, closer, no longer echoing from a ridge. It was coming from just beyond the tree line. Rhythmic, heavy, as if each beat landed on the earth with enough force to send vibrations through the soil. The traveler called out again. This time the voice came from the left side of the cabin, then from the right, then from somewhere behind them. Silas lifted the rifle despite his wife's warning. He took one step toward the door. The drumming stopped. The sudden silence felt heavier than the sound itself. Even the insects held their breath. Silas slowly opened the door, the rifle raised. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp leaves and river mist. But no traveler stood outside, no footprints in the soft earth, no movement. Then, from the tree line, a whisper. "You hear it too?" Silas fired instinctively. The gunshot echoed, the smoke cleared. Nothing. What happened next, the Caldwells would recount only once years later. A faint light flickered between the trees. Pale, almost bluish, like moonlight striking water. It shifted, swaying rhythmically, as if carried by an unseen figure moving to a beat only it could hear. Silas swore he saw the light pulse 3 times, then pause, then pulse again, matching the pattern Elias Turner had recorded decades earlier. When the light vanished, so did the voice. By morning, the search party found no traveler, no tracks, no evidence that anyone had ever approached the homestead. But what they did find, half a mile up the ridge, was a circle of stones arranged with eerie precision. 3 stones, a space, 3 more. The same pattern found near the dead hunters years before. As word spread through nearby settlements, fear gave way to a darker suspicion. The drumming wasn't bound to one valley. It moved, and the Caldwells believed they knew why. According to their family lore, the spirit drummer didn't guard the land from settlers or storms. He guarded the old trails where the boundaries between worlds narrowed, the thin paths, as they called them. Long before colonial maps, before surveyors carved straight lines across the slopes, the Cherokee spoke of places where the spirit world brushed close against the living, like 2 rivers running side by side with only a thin bank between them. The drum was not a warning to humans, it was a warning to whatever walked on the other side. And sometimes, the Caldwells whispered, the drum beat fastest when something crossed over. Reverend Whitcomb, still traveling the region in the early 1800s, recorded a story from a young Cherokee man who claimed the drummer was not a single spirit, but a lineage of guardians, shadows who carried the same purpose through time. He described them as those who walk the ridge of dusk, a poetic phrase Whitcomb never understood, but wrote verbatim. More chilling was the man's claim that the drummer only appeared through sight, sound, or omen when boundaries were disturbed, lands carved, spirits displaced, trails cut where they shouldn't be. The early 1800s were precisely that time. Logging expanded, settlements pushed deeper into the Blue Ridge, roads widened, trails altered, old paths abandoned. And with each change, the drummer's presence grew more frequent, more intense. By the 1820s, travelers along the French Broad River wrote of hearing the drum before river accidents. Farmers in the Pisgah foothills claimed it preceded sudden livestock deaths. And one family in the Swannanoa Valley insisted the beat grew frantic, almost panicked, the night their barn collapsed in a windless storm. During the Civil War, soldiers moving through the mountains reported it too. One Confederate scout wrote that the drum marched beside us, though no man held it. A Union soldier later claimed the sound moved ahead of their column, as if guiding them towards safe passage. But the most unnerving account came from a deserter who hid in the mountains in 1864. He said the drumming began softly at dusk and grew louder each night, as if closing in. When he finally emerged weeks later, starving and hollow-eyed, he told a farmer, "It wasn't chasing me, it was hurting me." After the war, the mountains grew quiet again, briefly, but the stories never stopped. Loggers in the 1870s refused to cut timber near certain ridges, where the drumming seemed to circle them like a predator. Railroad workers in the 1880s claimed the drum beat faster each time dynamite cracked the mountain walls. One engineer wrote, "The ridge answered us, and we should have listened." But the most detailed account of the era came from a school teacher, Martha Delling, who stayed with the Caldwells in the winter of 1889. She documented everything: their stories, their warnings, their belief that the drummer had grown restless. She wrote that the family seemed certain something ancient had been disturbed, something the drum had kept at bay for centuries. And on her last night in the hollow, she experienced it herself. The drumming didn't come from one direction. It surrounded the cabin, a full circle, a perimeter, as if something was on the inside and the drummer was keeping it there. When dawn came, she left quietly, her suitcase half packed, and never returned. But what she wrote in her journal became one of the most chilling accounts ever associated with the phantom drummer. Martha Delling described the night in precise, trembling detail. She had been sitting by the hearth, the cabin's small fireplace crackling softly, when the first beat came. At first, it was distant, a subtle vibration in the floorboards, almost imperceptible. She assumed it was some animal outside, perhaps a bear or an elk moving through the snow-dusted trees. But then, the rhythm became impossible to ignore. 3 slow beats, a pause, 3 more, and it carried a weight, a presence, that made her stomach turn cold. She peered through the frost-lined window. Nothing moved. The forest was still, the snow reflecting a pale, ghostly light. And yet, the sound continued, closer now, surrounding the cabin. From all directions, Martha realized, the drum had no source she could see, no shadow to trace, yet it was all around her. The Caldwells tried to calm her, but their faces betrayed the truth. They had heard this drumming for decades. They knew what it meant. Silas whispered, "Whatever it is, Martha, it won't come for us tonight, not if we honor the boundary." Eliza added, her voice low and urgent, "Sit, do not speak, do not move, and whatever you do not follow it." The sound shifted. Faster now, almost frantic, like a heartbeat under strain. Martha felt it vibrating in her chest, as if the rhythm had seeped into her very bones. Then she heard it, the faintest whisper in the static, carried on the cold mountain air. "Follow! Follow!" Martha froze. Her fingers clutched the edge of the table. Outside, the drumming matched the whisper now. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. But in the next moment, the pattern changed, becoming irregular, unpredictable, urgent. She realized with a shiver. It was not calling her to walk, but to obey a command she did not understand. The family held her close through the night. The drumming never stopped. It ebbed and swelled, fading into the echoes of the ridges, only to return louder, insistent, haunting. At one point, Martha swore she saw faint figures, translucent shapes moving beyond the tree line, stepping in rhythm with the drum. They vanished when she blinked, yet the sound followed, relentless. At dawn, the drumming ceased. Martha felt as though she had been wading through a nightmare, her body exhausted and trembling. She left immediately, her journal the only record of the night's terror. She noted chillingly, "It waits. It always waits. The mountains remember, and so does it." By the turn of the century, the Appalachian region had been mapped, logged, and partially settled. But the stories of the phantom drummer persisted. Railroad crews in the 1890s reported hearing drums along unfinished tracks. Local newspapers occasionally carried letters describing the beat heard in the hollows. Before accidents or sudden storms, families who had lived for generations in the same cabin reported hearing it during the coldest winter nights, a drumbeat that had no source but seemed to measure time itself, or the passage of something unseen. Even by the late 1800s, when folklore scholars began collecting stories from Cherokee elders, the drum was consistently described as a guardian, a spirit whose presence marked boundaries between worlds, whose rhythms foretold danger, death, or the movement of unseen entities. Some described it as benevolent, warning the living to tread carefully, others as a sentinel, containing whatever lay beyond the ridge, keeping it from spilling into the human world. Historians and folklorists who attempted to catalog the phenomenon often struggled to reconcile settler accounts with indigenous oral histories. Cherokee stories spoke of the drummer guarding trails to sacred sites, but settlers' journals emphasized its link to ominous events: storms, deaths, disappearances. Missionaries, soldiers, loggers, and teachers like Whitcomb and Delling all recorded the drum, each describing variations but an unmistakable continuity. It was everywhere, always rhythmic and inescapable once encountered. The phantom drummer became more than a local legend. It was a living echo of the past, a thread connecting the earliest Cherokee pathways, frontier homesteads, and later industrial intrusions into the mountains. The beat remained constant through centuries. 3 beats, a pause, 3 more. Sometimes a warning, sometimes a herald, and sometimes a summons. Today, hikers and historians still report hearing inexplicable drumming in remote hollows of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Scientific explanations point to echoes, wind patterns, or animal behavior, But those who know the old stories hesitate. They remember Elias Turner's journals, the Caldwell's warnings, Whitcomb's letters, and Martha Delling's final haunted testimony. And when the wind carries a distant, measured beat through the trees, even the most skeptical pause for one fleeting, unnerving moment and wonder, is it the mountains themselves, or is the phantom drummer still out there, guarding the old paths, measuring the living, and keeping what lies beyond contained? For centuries, the Appalachian ridges have held tight to their secrets, and some rhythms, it seems, will never be silenced.
Thank you for watching C&T Horror Stories, where the shadows speak and the night never ends. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because there are many more stories waiting in the dark, and they're getting impatient.